Lakota chief was blamed for a crime he did not do. A mute, a mute witness spoke for him and found love. The rifle was still warm when they put the irons on me. I remember that. The weight of the barrel in Deputy Crane's hand, the way he held it up, so the whole crowd in front of Gideon's store could see it. My rifle, my maker's mark stamped into the wood just below the forestock, right where my thumb always rested. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just held it up. And the crowd looked at the rifle, then looked at me. And that was enough. That was all the trial there would be, far as most of them were concerned. The man who was dead was Harlan Breckett. 37 years old, a cattleman from back east who'd come out to buy land along the Powder River drainage, and had, in 4 months, managed to make enemies of nearly every family for 20 miles in every direction. He'd fenced water. He'd grazed his herds across ground that 3 other ranchers had worked for a decade. He'd paid off 1 county official, that I know of, maybe 2. None of that mattered now. He was dead in a ditch off the Laramie Road, with a single shot through his chest, and the rifle that fired it had been found, they said, 50 yards from where he fell in the grass. Boss, my rifle. I am catches the wind. My mother named me that. My father was Oglala. My mother's people were from a small band that had wintered for generations along a particular bend of creek that no longer exists by any name white men use. I had lived 49 years by the time of Breckett's death. I had scouted for the army. I had trapped. I had ranched. I had fought and I had made peace. And I had buried people I loved. And I had been, for 11 years before that day, the man the county turned to when they needed someone who could move between the Lakota world and the white one, without either side shooting at him. I was not young, and I was not soft, and I am telling you this so you understand what it meant. When I say they put those irons on me, and I did not fight, I could have. 3 men to take me, and Crane half drunk before noon. I could have taken the rifle from him, put 2 of them down, and been across the river by nightfall. I thought about it. There was a moment. The irons not yet closed, my hands still free, where every instinct I had pointed the same direction. Run. I didn't run, because I knew, and I knew that the right road was the harder one. And because I am who I am, and because a man who runs from a lie becomes defined by the running, not by the lie, they put me in the jail in Caldwell. Brick building, 1 window, iron door. Sheriff was a man named Aldous Pruitt, who'd always treated me square. Pruitt was up in Cheyenne at the time, and wouldn't be back for 9 days. And the deputy in charge was Crane, who had reasons of his own to want me gone. I didn't know yet what they were. I was working on it, inside my head, in that cell, going through every man I'd crossed in the last year, every deal I'd been part of, every piece of land that had changed hands, every conversation that might have left someone sour enough to set me up for murder. That was the first night. The second night she came. I didn't know her name then. I'd seen her around town. You couldn't miss her, exactly, though most people managed to. Small woman, maybe 30 years old, dark-haired, with a way of moving that was very still and careful, the way someone moves when they have learned not to draw attention to themselves. She worked for Etta Morse, who ran the boarding house on the south end of Caldwell's Main Street. Cleaned rooms, helped with laundry, cooked when Etta's back gave out. She'd been in town about a year, arrived with a single bag, and a letter of introduction that Etta had never actually verified. She didn't speak, not couldn't. Or so most people assumed but wouldn't. There was no obvious reason. She wasn't deaf. She heard everything. She just didn't talk. And after a while the town stopped waiting for her too, and filed her away as simple, or damaged, or some kind of mute, mostly left her alone. Her name was Clara Voss. I found that out later. She came to the jail window at maybe 10 o'clock that second night. I heard the scratch of her boot on the brick ledge outside before I saw her face in the narrow gap. The window was high and small, and she'd climbed up on something to reach it. She was holding something in her hand. Looked like a piece of folded paper. She pushed it through the gap and it dropped onto the floor of my cell. I picked it up, unfolded it. A drawing. Done in pencil, quick lines, clear. A road, indicated by two parallel lines. A tree, she'd put a particular fork in it at the top, so I'd know which tree. A man on horseback, and the angle of the horse and rider told me he was going away from town, not toward it. A second man standing in the grass beside the road, drawn with his right arm raised, and off to the side an X, like a mark on a map. I looked at the window. She was watching me through the gap, face in pieces, one eye visible, a piece of her jaw, waiting. I held up the drawing and pointed at the X. She nodded. I pointed at the mounted man and then at myself a question. She shook her head, pointed away, not me. I pointed at the man standing. She nodded again, and then she did something that was not a word but that I understood. She brought two fingers to her own collar, pinching the fabric, and made a small downward pull. Then pointed at the standing figure in the drawing, a detail. An identifying detail. Then she was gone. Just gone, slid off whatever she'd been standing on, and I heard her footsteps moving away from the building, quick and quiet. Sat with that drawing for a long time. The X was a location. The man on horseback leaving was Beckett. Had to be. The man standing was his killer, someone she'd seen from wherever she'd been on the Laramie Road that afternoon. The gesture with the collar. She'd seen something. A badge, maybe. A distinct piece of clothing. Something that told her who the standing man was. And she had come to tell me. Not the deputy. Not anyone in a position of authority in that town. Me, in a jail cell, irons off now, but locked in as solid as if they were still on. I slept about an hour that night. The rest of the time, I was working through what she'd seen and what I knew, and what I could prove from the inside. A brick cell. Pruitt came back on the 7th day, not the 9th. His business in Cheyenne had gone fast. I heard his horse before I heard his voice, and his voice before the key in the lock, and when the door opened, he looked at me the way a man looks when he's already heard things he doesn't like. Crane says you threatened Beckett last month, Pruitt said. Not as an accusation, just setting it out on the table between us. Crane is lying, I said. Or he heard a different conversation than the one that happened. Pruitt sat down on the stool outside my cell and put his hat on his knee. He was a tall, spare man with a gray mustache and the habit of being quiet when other men would talk. I respected that. Tell me your day, he said. Told him. All of it. Where I'd been, the route I'd taken, the time I'd arrived home. The fact that my rifle had been in my barn that morning, and I hadn't touched it that day at all. Because I'd been on a roan horse doing boundary work, not hunting. Someone took it, I said, from your barn. Lock wasn't forced. Someone who knew where I kept it or got lucky. Pruitt looked at me. You have something else. I have a name almost. Almost. I need you to bring me Clara Voss from the boarding house. He looked at me for a moment. I could see him calculating. What did the mute woman from the boarding house have to do with a murder on the Laramie? She doesn't talk, he said. She communicates, I said. If you'll let her. He brought her that same afternoon. She came into the like she always moved. Quietly, watching everything at once. When she saw me through the cell bars, she stopped, and there was something in her face that was not surprise. She'd known Pruitt would come back. She'd been waiting for this. Pruitt said to her, not unkindly, this man says you may have seen something on the Laramie Road the day Beckett was shot. She looked at Pruitt for a moment. Then she looked at me, a question in it. I said in Lakota, and then in English, he is a good man, he wants the truth. And she pulled a folded paper from her apron pocket. Not the same one she'd passed through the window. That one I'd kept. But a new one, more careful, done with more time. She handed it to Pruitt. He unfolded it and looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then he said, very quietly, who is this? She crossed to him and pointed at the figure's collar. The detail she'd shown me through the window. Pruitt looked at it. His face changed. He knew. He didn't say it out loud. He folded the paper once and put it in his vest pocket and thanked her, and she left. Pruitt sat in that jail for another hour without saying much of anything. I didn't push. I'd been still for 7 days. Could be still another hour. What she had drawn, I didn't find out the whole of it until later, after everything was settled. She had drawn was Deputy Crane, standing on the Laramie Road, with his arm raised. At the moment, Harlan Brackett's horse came around the bend. She had been in the ditch grass, down low, for reasons of her own that I won't go into here, picking something, or resting, just sitting with the quiet that a mute woman might need more of than others. Hidden not on purpose but by circumstance, and she had seen everything. She had seen Crane fire. She had seen him walk to where my rifle had been dropped in the grass, carried there by Crane in a saddlebag, and she'd seen him walk it those 50 yards and lay it down where the searchers would find it, and she had been too afraid to tell anyone, because a woman who does not speak has no standing in a sheriff's proceeding. And Crane was dangerous, and there was no one to tell who she trusted to act on it, until Pruitt came home. Until I told Pruitt to bring her. Crane was arrested 4 days later. Pruitt did it quietly, in the man's own kitchen, without a scene. Turned out Crane had been in Brackett's pocket. Not in the way you'd think, not hired to protect him, but in debt to him, a piece of land held as surety against money Crane had borrowed 2 years back. Brackett had told Crane he was calling it in. Crane had a wife and a daughter in that house, and nowhere else to go. And he'd made a terrible decision and then tried to hang it on the most convenient neck available, mine. Pruitt let me out on the afternoon of the 11th day, unlocked the cell himself, shook my hand, and told me he was sorry. I told him to be sure the right charge stuck to Crane. He said he would. I believed him. I walked out onto Caldwell's Main Street in the afternoon sun, with my rifle, which Pruitt had recovered and cleaned, under my arm. People looked. Some looked away. A few nodded. I walked to my horse, which Pruitt's deputy had been feeding and watering, and I stood there a moment before I mounted. That's when I saw her. Across the street in front of the boarding house, beating a rug hung over a line. She had her back to me. Small, dark-haired, working hard and fast, with a flat-headed beater, sending dust up into the afternoon light. I crossed the street. She heard me coming, or felt it, some shift in the air, and turned before I got to her. She still had the rug beater in her hand, and she looked at me with an expression I did not entirely know how to read. Something careful in it, something that had been holding itself in for a long time, and something else under that. I stopped 2 feet from her. I am not a small man, and she was not a tall woman, and she looked up at me without flinching. I said, in English, "You didn't have to do what you did." She held my look. "I know what it cost you," I said, "to go near that jail, to trust that Pruitt would act, to put yourself in front of this." I paused. "I am grateful. I want you to know that." She set the rug beater against the line post, and then she did something unexpected. She reached out and took hold of my left wrist, not my hand, my wrist, just below where the iron had been, where there was a faint chafe mark still. And both her hands around it, her thumbs over the mark. Just that. Holding it, like she was saying, "I know what they did to you. I know what it was like. And I chose to act anyway, not out of obligation, because you were worth it." That's what I understood from that. Maybe I'm wrong. But I don't think so. I put my other hand over hers. We stood there in the afternoon, with the dust drifting off that rug, and the going on around us, and neither of us said a word. She started coming by my place about a week after that. Not every day. She had her work at the boarding house, and I had mine, but she'd ride out on the old bay mare, Etta kept for errands, and she'd find me wherever I was working, mending fence, or moving a water trough, or cutting wood. And she'd just be there. Sometimes she brought food, sometimes she brought nothing. Sometimes she'd work alongside me without being asked, and she was not helpless. That woman. She knew how to work, knew the difference between tools, knew the way you have to set a fence post, if the ground is frozen underneath. I didn't ask how she knew. You don't always have to ask. We talked, or I talked, and she answered in ways that did not use words, and after a while it was not strange. It was, in fact, easier than most conversations I had with people who talked all the time. She listened the way a person listens when they have always had to pay attention, which is to say completely, not waiting for their turn, but actually hearing what you said. And her face and her hands answered. And I started to understand her the way you understand the weather. Not perfectly, not always correctly, but well enough to act on it. She told me things in her way. About where she'd come from. Somewhere in the East, I gathered. Particular kind of house that she drew. Once on the back of a feed sack. A big house with too many windows. The kind of house where things happen to a young woman that she should not have to weather. She told me about the year before Caldwell. Moving from town to town, finding work, losing it, being afraid. She told me, and this one took a long time to say, drawn in team pieces over several visits, that she had stopped speaking some years back because speaking had only ever gotten her into trouble. Silence had seemed safer, and then the silence had just become how she was. I said to her, one evening, sitting on my porch with the last of the light going, "You spoke up for me. Without a word, you spoke up louder than anyone." She looked at me for a long time. Then, she turned to the sky and I thought she was done. She reached out and took hold of my hand. The same way she'd held my wrist that first time. And this time she put it flat against her own chest, briefly then released it. I understood that too. We were not young, either of us. I had not been expecting this kind of thing. When my first wife, Turning Leaf, died of fever in the winter of my 38th year, I had grief walked through the years after and come out the other side a different and quieter man, and I had made my peace with being alone. Or I thought I had. You think you've made peace with a thing, and then you find out you only buried it deep enough that you forgot it was there. It came up around her. All of it. Not in a rush, not like a river flooding. More the way ground thaws, slow and uneven, one patch at a time. She wasn't delicate. That's the thing I want to say. She was not a woman who needed carrying. She'd carried herself through considerable country, already, alone. And she had her own hard angles. She'd be direct in the middle of a disagreement, in her fashion. She'd just look at me a certain way and stand her ground. And I always knew when I was wrong, because she'd make it plain without any meanness in it, just clarity. She was funny, which surprised me. You can be funny without words. She had a quick instinct for the ridiculous, and she'd catch my eye when something struck her, and there was that flash in her face, and I'd see it before I even heard the thing myself, and then she'd be right. She was good. Just good. Whatever had happened to her, treat. Whatever the East and the years of moving had done, it hadn't touched the center of her. Some people get worn down, and what's left is bitterness or just nothing, a kind of emptiness where a person used to be. Not Clara. The center held. I don't know how, entirely. But I could feel it, the same way you can feel good ground under your horse, the solid kind that won't shift. Late that fall, when the nights were coming on cold and the first frost had hit the basin, I asked her to stay. Not asked her to marry me. Not right then, not with some big words about it. I just told her that the winter was coming, and the house was warm, and there was no reason she needed to go back to Etta Morse's cold attic room. I told her she had earned a roof and a fire if she wanted it, and that I wanted her to have it. She stood in my kitchen while I said this. She was holding a coffee cup in both hands, and she looked at me the whole time I talked. And when I was done, she set the cups down on the table very carefully. And then she looked around the kitchen, at the stove, the window over the basin, at the table, at me, taking it in, like she was measuring something. Then she went to the door, put on her coat, and walked out. I stood there. She was back in 40 minutes with her bag. One bag, same one she'd carried into Caldwell a year before. She set it inside the door and looked at me, and there was something in her face that I had to look away from for a moment because it was too much, the directness of it, the willingness of it. She was choosing. She was choosing plainly, without negotiation or hedging, and she was choosing me. I'm not sure I'd had that before. Not like that. Turning Leaf and our marriage was arranged, good and solid and true, and I loved her, and she loved me. But this was different. Clara had seen me accused and jailed, and near destroyed, had seen me at the absolute low mark, had known me only in the aftermath of something ugly, and she had looked at all of that, and chosen to come across the street and hold my wrist. She stood inside the door, with her bag, and I crossed the room and put both hands on her face, gently, and I looked at her and said, "I will earn this." She shook her head, a small, impatient movement, like she was declining that whole framing of it. Like earning wasn't the point. Like the point was just the choosing. I understood that too. We were married in the spring, such as that meant for two people in our situation. Teet came, and an Oglala elder, named Standing Bear, who had known my father, and Etta Morse, who cried, which surprised me, because I had taken her as a harder woman. It was a short ceremony, two kinds, the one for the white world and the one for mine. Clara wore a dress the color of sage, and she stood beside me in the new grass with the mountains behind us, and she put her hand in mine when it was time, and she held it. That's the image I keep. Not the drama of it, the jail or the drawing or Crane being led off, but that. The mountains and the grass, and her hand in mine, and her looking up at me, and the way the morning light was in her face. I had been written off, not just by Crane and the mob of them in front of Gideon's store, but earlier, in a longer way, over years. The world had found me inconvenient, and old, and outside the categories it preferred, and it had done its best to make me invisible or worse. I had kept going anyway, because what else do you do? You keep going. And here, at the end of a hard road, was this woman who had seen me at my lowest, and had pulled her coat on and walked out into the cold to find a pencil and paper, and had climbed up on a crate outside a jail window in the dark, and had handed a drawing through a 6-inch gap to a man in irons, because she thought his life was worth saving. That's not nothing. That's not a small thing. She still doesn't talk much. Some mornings in the kitchen she'll say a word or two. Not because she has recovered her speech in any dramatic way, because sometimes a word comes, and she uses it, and sometimes it doesn't, and she doesn't. I don't need the words. I know what she means. I know how she takes her coffee, and the sound she makes when something pleases her, and the particular stillness she gets when she is thinking hard about something, and the way she looks at the mountains when she is at peace. She knows what I am worth. She decided that in the dark outside a jail window, 11 years ago now, and she has not revised the judgment since. There is nothing I can tell you about dignity that she hasn't shown me, without a single word. The rifle hangs above the door. I keep it clean. The stock, just below the forestock, is the maker's mark where my thumb always rests. Some mornings she'll reach up and touch the wood when she passes it briefly, just her fingertips. I don't know entirely why. Maybe it's the same reason I keep it there. A reminder of the thing that almost was, and wasn't, because a good woman had clear eyes and a steady hand and chose to use them. That's all I have to tell you. That's enough.